Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. My name's Brian. Today we're doing something a little bit different. Behind me is our cargo trailer. It's a 5x10 enclosed cargo trailer. We've had it for something like 8 years, and we have been all up and down the East Coast with it this summer. Made a trip to Massachusetts, then we went to the Outer Banks for a week. I think we're done for a while. We bought this new and used it plenty. One thing I did notice when we got it, it has a little bit of corrosion on the back door. I didn't think much about it. Other than that, I put a set of tires on. That's all I've done to it. Well, this door at the front, it has glue-on plywood pretty much that lines the inside, and it got a hole in it. It was getting pretty beat up, so I took it apart, or cut the wood off. I added this piece of diamond plate to protect the inside, kind of stiffen up the door. Made it function a whole lot better. It kind of has that treatment on the nose, except this stuff's pretty thin. Anyway, the back door started developing little spots of corrosion on the aluminum, and it's pretty flimsy. Well, one thing I did notice was you could see a gap sometimes of light on the inside because the door actually sags. And you could close it, pick it up, and push it in, and it would seal better, but it's kind of jacked up. This is one of the few I've seen that doesn't have a ramp, which makes it, in my opinion, a little nicer for just moving furniture and stuff. Anyway, I snugged up some of these bolts to try to take this little movement out of it, and ended up snapping this one off. So that snapped off. It's kind of like a nut. Anyway, I've been planning on fixing this for a while, and I'm pretty sure what'll happen is if I don't fix it now, next time we go to use it, it'll be worse, and it'll be like freezing cold or pouring down rain. So, I don't know if you can see it, but it's obviously not good. So, we'll get this off here, take it apart, and see what we have to work with. I do want to try to save what I can of this door because it's kind of been a roadmap of our travels over the years. So that's what holds it on, a carriage bolt, and then this Torx kind of barrel nut on the inside. I would guess at this point all it's holding it on beat a caulk, and it is. And I swear the lawn mowing didn't start until I got the camera out. I don't think it sounds as bad on camera as it does to me right now, but anyway, I apologize for that. These are regular Phillips screws. I'm gonna pull this trim off the inside and see how this comes apart. Guess they could be Phillips or square. Appears this inner and outer is all one piece, so then you pull these screws out, try to pull it off that way. I'm pretty sure all the wood inside here is going to be rotten, whatever's in there. Oh, and it is. Oh, that's bad. I would guess at this point this ought to pull off. Yeah, that's like Gone City. It appears they glued it on this side. I was going to try to reuse this if I can peel this glue off. I have to admit, that's a little worse than I thought that was going to be. Alright, so obviously this luan, or whatever you want to call this, up to this point is pretty much no good. So I'm going to mark it and I guess cut across here and get this out of the way. I think before I cut that, I'll go ahead and pull these side pieces off. And I also don't know how rotted it is under there, and it does not feel good. So let me get these pulled off. I'm gonna set this blade depth just enough to go through the skin in case there's anything salvageable below. So that looks like the construction. Looks like just strips of 3/4 plywood. Like so. What I don't really understand is how the water got in and just pretty much wicked up all the way through. So I'm going to get some dimensions and I'll measure this up. Just so once I start hacking all this, I know what the size needs to go back to be, but that's just gone. So obviously this bottom piece is gone, will need to be replaced, and then partially up, these 4 pieces that make up the vertical portion of the door, looks like they were just stapled together here at the bottom. I did find some scraps of 3/4 inch plywood. I mean, it's cabinet grade, but I don't know that I'll ever use that for anything useful. I can likely cut that down and make the bottom one a little wider. It ain't gonna hurt anything. Then I'm thinking I can cut some strips and kind of do a half lap joint and half lap them together. That way I won't have to get all the way up into stuff that's good. I can just lap over to where it's good, screw and glue it, and it should hold it. And I believe the reason this failed would be this trim on the outside. This lip was not sealed on the bottom, so water could run down the outside of the sheet metal, get in to this channel, and there was no way for it to get out. This is a side piece, but the bottom piece that's the bottom piece, so water would just sit in there. Likely they could have just drilled some holes in there and alleviated the whole problem, which is probably what I'll do, but I'll probably also caulk that, or maybe even the replacement piece of metal overlap the outside. Anyway, to do all that, I'm going to need to get my table saw out, and that is all the way over there. This bottom piece is 50 inches wide. I've marked that out. I made this crosscut sled a couple years ago. I'm going to go ahead and use it to cut this. Doesn't need to be perfect, but for a long piece like this, my chop saw won't cut all the way through it, so this works pretty well for this. So there's my bottom piece. Now we need to figure out what we need to do for the pieces coming down to it. So I've cut my bottom piece, and then I scabbed on a piece with a lap joint and some glue. This will attach this way and my measurement comes out right. So now you go repeat that for all these and I'll show you how I did that. I'll go ahead and use this one as my layout line. This is somewhat square. I'll just make them all the same. So that's where I'll do the dado, and then I'll cut them off right about there. So now I'll go ahead and set the depth and just cut all them off. I want it just to be the thickness of the board for right now. Trying not to cut through the aluminum, although I already have. Now I don't have to worry about it. Since this is 3/4 inch plywood, I'll set the blade depth to 3/8 and we'll cut scarf just halfway through there, and then we'll come back and chisel all that out. Helps if you plug it back in. I've set the blade depth and the distance to the fence, and I'll cut that slot right there. I made that test piece and I think that'll be good. Now I'll do it for the other pieces. Ideally, you'd have a tenoning jig. This isn't the most fun cut to do, but just keep your hands away from the blade and ease it through there. I'm sure there's a lot of people going to hate on this, but here goes. Now we can set the blade just by eyeball to remove that amount right there. You can set the fence and use this little spacer to get this distance right on all of them. I'm going to test it. There, that works out pretty flush. So I Probably need to clean these up just a little bit more on the edges to get it to sit flat, and we'll glue them on. I used wood glue on that first one, and I found my Gorilla Glue, so we'll Gorilla Glue this thing. I'm gonna go get these pieces wet, and that helps activate the glue. These screws will act as clamps for right now. Okay, those feel pretty solid. We'll let them dry probably overnight. So it's the next weekend. I've marked out where I need to cut all these off. I just ran them long so I can cut them all square. I've got my straight edge clamped down and screwed down because it wants to kind of lift up. And what happens is the shoe of the table, the circular saw will slip under there and you'll cut or get all jacked up. And this saw is so old, the shoe's pretty thin too. So I should be able to just hold this up tight against the fence, and we'll cut these legs off, and then we'll glue and screw the bottom piece on. And it should be 5 1/8 inches away, and it should be square. Let me pull this off. Now this piece that I cut previously, we can join that straight to the bottom. I'm gonna go ahead and join this using pocket screws. So we'll clamp this jig on. Drill a hole. And then down in that pocket, we'll run a screw in, and that will attach the bottom piece. So I'll go ahead and drill probably some screws going both directions in both pieces of wood. Clamp down some pieces to support our bottom rail. I've drilled screws both directions, drilled pockets, I should say. And since I've marked my locations, I'll go ahead and apply this glue where it's needed. This being polyurethane glue, you do not want to get this stuff on your hands for long because it does not come off. It's also moisture cured, so I'm going to just give the end grain of this other wood a little wipe with a rag that's wet. It's humid enough out here, likely don't need to do that. Now, should be able just to butt this up, make sure my end's square. I'll go ahead and put a screw in this end. Make sure it's flush. All right, that's as stiff as it's going to get. We'll let that sit for a few minutes, and then I'll pull the clamps off. And then we'll let that cure for a while. While this glue dries a little longer, I think I'm going to leave these screws in, but I don't want them protruding above the surface. So I came up with this little trick. I have a Forstner bit, which will drill a flat bottom hole. I'll just drill a little. Just really need to go down the thickness of the head of this screw. And I can put it back in the hole where it was, and it still won't come through the other side. But it'll help hold the wood together, and now it'll be flush with the surface, so when I put my glue on, or whatever I put to replace the rotted off wood, it won't be bumped up and it'll sit flat. So I flipped the door over. The license plate bracket still has attached to the remnants of the wood, so let's get that off there. Of course, it looks like they glued this also, so I'm going to have to get in here and scrape all this garbage off so this panel will lay flat. And this should go back exactly where it came from. This isn't exactly a showpiece, so these old screws can go back in. Right back in the same holes, that way everything will line up. Before I put the bottom on, I'm going to do what the factory should have done and put some drain holes in the bottom of this piece of channel. In theory, that way if water does get in there in the future, it has an escape route and just doesn't sit there and rot everything. Well, that appears a little unfortunate for some reason. Looks like our cut wasn't as square as we thought it was. Everything lines up perfect on this end. Down here, we're all the way against that channel. We're probably a 1/4 inch off. Lovely. Well, you can see it. I buzzed a little bit off that. Let's see how that works. Much better. It's actually probably better that the wood doesn't contact the bottom of the channel. That way if those drain holes, it gives it some room for the water to get out. If water gets in the future, which I hope it doesn't. So in order to fill in where the wood's missing, I had this piece of beadboard, which I'll probably never do anything with. But it's thicker than the existing wood. This is like 1/10 of an inch thick, and this is almost 2/10. So what I need to do is, to make it fit under the molding and fit, I need to plow out some of this wood. I've already done this piece as a test. Already cut this piece to size. In order for it to fit, I need to plow out this area and then this side. So what I've done is I'll just bring the blade up about half the thickness of the wood. Set the fence to about what that is. Then just cut it. So I've scarfed that enough. Now I need to do this side and do the same thing. Now I can just use a chisel and that'll knock right out of there. This obviously isn't going to be perfect. Just gives our cargo a little something to bang into. A little thicker than that. I'll likely put some metal back over this, but for right now, let's get this screwed back on. For right now, I'll just put a couple screws to hold all this down. Probably a good time to make sure we're still somewhat square. It's within 1/8 of an inch. I'll call that good. So I think we're ready to go back on. I'm not really sure the best way to do this because I still need to drill the holes for the bottom. So I think for right now, I'm going to get it over there, set it on there, make sure everything lines up, and then go from there. All right, I think we're good. These hinges have some movement in them, so I don't think the holes need to be exactly right. I found a drill bit that pretty much fits the center of the hole perfect. So I'll just center up on what's here, and we'll just do that.
Get these kind of documents?
He did.
Oh, sorry.
That's probably your report card.
No, it's a direct from Dr. Parson.
Yeah. Now YouTube knows her whole name. Let's see if it even comes close to shutting.
Shut to me.
Yeah, that shuts better. That's shut better than it probably ever has. And there's no wiggle in it. So it's been a few weeks and we've relocated the trailer into its normal parking spot. I could likely leave that like it is, but that corroded stuff and that little slice over there bothers me, so I was able to purchase a piece of diamond tread aluminum from a local metal supplier that we will cover that up with. I could unbolt this hinge and apply the diamond tread and then have to like bend the hinge to make it work right because the top one wouldn't have that thickness under it. But then in my experience, that'll never sit flush and right on this. So I think we'll make a template to the shape of this hinge and go ahead and cut out the metal and have the hinge just be on that surface, and we won't have to mess with it, and then this will clad over all that. Of course, we picked like the hottest day of the year to do this. It's like 95 out here and directly in the sun. In order to get this template to make my cut, I took a beverage container and cut a perfect 90 on it with a square. And now I'm just going to mark my edges. It's a 2-inch hinge, 8 inches out, and the total is 10. So I'll draw that out and then we'll come back and test fit it. After a few back and forths at the cutting table, managed to make that template, which I think should work fine. Come around here to where it's in the low 90s. So this is where we'll cut it out on the door. This is supposed to be sheared square. So we're going to cut from the back side. This video is not sponsored, by the way. Looks as though the radius on the end of that hinge is about 3/8 of an inch. So we'll start with a 3/8 drill bit right there. Try to center it up on the V and go right to the edge of the pencil line. Since I'm going to cut this with a jigsaw, I'm going to go ahead and knock these corners off with the drill bit. We'll try the finest blade I have. Here goes. So I've done a test fit, and that's pretty close. It just needs cleaned up a little bit and try to clean that corner up some. So for that, I'm going to switch to the next noisiest tool I have. Finally got that to fit the way I wanted it. I purchased some number 8 by 1/2 inch screws, and I've laid out a line around and divided it out. So I'll go ahead and pre-drill for the screws using an 11/64 drill bit, and that seems to give me the best fit. All those holes are drilled, and since I drilled through from the back side, it left a little burr on all these holes. I'm going to go ahead and use a countersink bit and just knock those burrs off. You don't really need to do this, but it just makes putting the screws in a little easier. Okay, so I think we're ready to go. I think I finally got this thing to fit right. Or fit well enough. I'll mark my highest point. I'm going to go ahead and run the bead of silicone down behind it so water won't run down the door and get in behind this piece. It won't take much, but might as well do this now. And where I cut through, I'll go ahead and caulk this shut too. I'm not sure whose dog's barking, but for once it's not mine. Guess we're gonna lose the whale too. Oh yeah, one more thing. So there's that. It's a little wavy right on top. I'll come back in a little bit and lay a bead of caulk in there to make sure that's sealed. But while we're here, looks so good, I don't really want to use those rusty screws. So let me get the drill and we'll pre-drill and use some of these stainless ones. So one last thing, add a little bead of caulk across the top of this. Keep any more water intrusion out of there. Go add a little bit down here at this hinge too. So I think that's a pretty solid repair, inside and out. Ought to last for many more years. Way more solid than it was, even when it was new. While we're here, I have one more addition. If you're ever in the area, you should check it out. Anyway, thanks for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you soon.